Welcome to the Mind and Crip Theology podcast, hosted by Miriam and Amy Patton, which come out of the Canadian Journal of Theology, Mental Health, and Disability.
We both live and work on lands that have been homes and remain homes to the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Neutral, and the Ojibwe Chippewa peoples and other peoples who have cared for the land.
We are grateful for the opportunity to live and work on this land and are mindful of the need to repair broken covenants.
This podcast is an opportunity to model how faith communities can engage in theological and spiritual conversations around madness and cripness.
If you need a full transcript, you can find our videos on our YouTube channel.
We want to say before we begin that topics and conversations we are raising throughout our time together are often hard.
They are hard for Mad and Crip people ourselves, and hard for our families and loved ones.
So do what you need to do to take care of yourselves, your bodies, minds, and hearts.
And now, here is our episode.
Hello, welcome to the Mad and Crip Theology podcast. We are so glad that you joined us this afternoon. Well, sorry, where we are, it's the afternoon, to tune in for another episode. And today we are joined by Iris and Sharoni, two of our contributors to the recent issue of the journal, and they're both artists. So we're so blessed to have you here with us. And over to you, Miriam.
And we wondered if you could introduce yourself. So your name, your pronouns, how you're connected to the journal or to the field of mental health, disability, and spirituality, and also a physical description of yourself and your background. So maybe we'll begin with Iris.
Thank you so much. I'm so lovely to be here and meet you all today. I'm really grateful. So I'm Iris J. Gildea. I use she, her pronouns. I connected to the journal because I'm doing, I found out about the journal because I'm a student at the MPS program at Emmanuel College, and was so excited when I saw the call. So especially excited to see an inclusion of art around these themes of spirituality and disability, and was just really grateful to see that. And I am speaking to you today. I'm actually in British Columbia. I'm not in Toronto because I've been working and doing everything online. So I'm on one of the Gulf Islands, Cortez Island, and I am sitting here at my desk with a cup of warm coffee, and I have glasses on that are green glasses and long, curly, somewhat frizzy brown hair. I'm white, cisgender, female, and I just turned 40.
Oh, happy birthday. Thank you, Iris.
Thank you.
And Sharoni.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and happy birthday, Iris. So my name is Sharoni Sibony, and I am a white cisgender woman. I use she, her pronouns, and I am located in Toronto, or Tekaronto. And I have dark brown shoulder length hair and black glasses. And I am currently just a little floating head in a Zoom box sitting against a multicolored watercolor wallpaper background, yellow, purple, and sort of reddish tones in it. Thank you. Oh, and my connection to the journal, I was going to tell you. Yeah, I came to you, Amy and Miriam, because I had shared a couple of images of my work on Facebook, and a friend of mine knew some people who knew your journal and connected me to it. So I'm an alum of U of T, but I didn't know, I'm not keeping abreast so much of what's going on these days because my work is not in academia. So it was just really exciting to get connected to you and to see what you're developing with the journal. So I'm really impressed, and thank you so much for including me in it.
Well, we're so happy that both of you could contribute to this issue, and we've had such awesome feedback about your work from both of you. So thank you so much. And the first question we wanted to ask both of you is about your art. So we wanted to ask you both that you turn to art as a means of expressing your spirituality. So can you tell us when you first found out that art was helpful or healing to you? I'm wondering, Iris, if you wouldn't mind starting off for us.
Of course. It's kind of funny because as Amy was just asking that question, I had a flash of myself as a really young child making art in my room. And so I think my answer is different than what I thought it was. I think in the way that children do, I just intuitively went to the arts, and as my work expresses, I lived with a lot of childhood trauma and came from a very abusive home. And so I think being in my room, making art with glitter and color was a way of both cultivating safety and expressing myself. But that said, it was actually much later into my late 20s when I came to visual art. Unfortunately, like many people through the school system, like when I got a bad grade on an art project in school, I took it as my failed, like, you are not an artist. And for me, I was like a perfectionist in school. So it was like, okay, that's not what I can do. And it was really once I was really processing my trauma and integrating and healing, that my Buddhist Gestalt therapist actually recommended, I came in saying that I started waking up with like colors in my head, and I was telling her about this yellow band in my head, and she was like, well, why don't you draw it? And I was like, what? I couldn't do that? And then I started painting, and it was just like flooding out of me images and experiences, and it all happened quite organically. For me. And then I trained in expressive arts and developed more of a formal practice. But briefly, that's, I guess, my journey there.
We're so glad that you didn't give up after the school gave you a bad grade on your art. And, you know, I'm sure Miriam also can say that both of us, because we're both PhD students right now, getting feedback on some of our written work, we have the same kind of experience like me this week, wondering, you know, should I give up? Should I keep going? Is this worth it? And yeah, it's I'm so grateful to the people in my life who encourage me and get me to keep going. So thank you, Iris. And Sharoni, can I ask you to tell the listeners your answer to the question?
Yeah, sure. And I just want to say also, Amy, as a person who eventually did leave a PhD some years ago, and am very happy in my life now, but had a whole transition period out of that. Just, you know, stick it out, but don't invest all your emotional energy in response to the people, to the advisors' responses, right? The world is much bigger than those 2 or 3 people on your committee. So stay strong.
Sometimes it can feel like it's not, but yes, thank you so much.
I know.
Yes.
I have a lot of friends who've gone through grad school PhD programs, and I always find myself offering that kind of counsel, because now that I've moved out into the world outside of my department, I see it in a different way.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, I don't have, I saw your question in advance and I didn't have a concrete answer to it. I actually, I don't know I think it's just always been there as a tool, art as a tool for spiritual self-expression, or just self-expression in a way that I didn't necessarily understand as spiritual for most of my life. And most of my artistic practices until the pandemic were in a clay studio. And I had done pottery as a hobby for 25 years or something. And I came to it really not through a high school class, but through a summer program that we had in high school, and just loved the medium, just loved working with clay, and just kept going with it as a hobby for years and years. And then about 5 years ago, I quit a full-time salaried job and went back to school to Sheridan College in Oakville, Ontario. And I pursued part of a degree, again, didn't finish that one either, in clay, in craft and design. And I'm drawn to it all the time. And my greatest struggle, I would say, is that in the last 2 years, since March 13th, 2020, I haven't been in a studio, and I haven't had my hands in the mud. And it was always a process for me that allowed a lot of emotional regulation, right? It was always a meditative, calming practice, whether I was sitting at a wheel or carving clay and shaping coil pots or something like that. But there's an inherent spirituality in the earthiness of the material, I think, and in working directly with it, my hands in it, as opposed to having tools in the way. I know Iris talks about that. You talk about that in your own work a little bit, or different kinds of tools, right? But for me, that really tactile experience was emotionally grounding more than consciously a spiritual thing. And it's only in the last couple of years that I've kind of expressed it or understood it as a spiritual practice for myself. And it's partly because since the pandemic started and Zoom opened up the world to us, and I've been able to go to classes elsewhere that are like transgeographic classes now, right? I found an organization in California called the Jewish Studio Project. And they have a whole thing about creative process as spiritual practice. It's informed by expressive arts therapy practices, but it's recentered in a Jewish communal space. And then art making becomes a prayer, right? In a sense. And it's really beautiful. They talk about the studio as a sanctuary, and like there's just all this amazing language around it. And there's a ritualized way of doing art making in that space. And I'm now training through them in what they have a creative facilitator training cohort right now. So I'm doing some training with them. And so I'm much more immersed in it on the daily, and really much more conscious of how I use that as another mechanism to access my connection to Jewish community, or my sense of the divine and the creative source in the world and coming through me, or my sense of inner calm, all of those pieces. And my sense of like social revolution a little bit is nurtured through that too. Like, how can I put more healing energy into the world, in a sense, right? More love and more goodness through the art. So that's where I'm at with it now. But that's a conscious thing that's only happened in the last couple of years, I would say.
Wow, it sounds so interesting. And I love what you said about thinking about art making as prayer. I know part of the program that Miriam and I are in, they talk to us a lot about writing as a spiritual practice, and trying to frame like our daily like slugging through our writing as a prayer or as an offering to God. So I really appreciate that. Sharoni, thank you so much. And I think Miriam has our next question.
And this is for Iris, and your piece talk about you being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And often we hear about stories where churches or spiritual communities have been a source of more harm than healing in these stories. And so we are wondering if you can tell us about something that someone in your faith community has done to help with your healing journey?
Thanks, Miriam. I saw this question, and unfortunately, in my experience, as Miriam kind of suggested there, of the stories that you hear, like in my particular experience, I would say I have received more harm from formal faith communities, and that's not, it's not intentional. Like, and I think part of the reason is like I'm also a feminist trauma theorist, and I work with this language of the deficiency praxis, which is kind of the model that a lot of mental health approaches survivors from. And it's kind of this idea that because of circumstances that we are somehow deficient, right? And I think that's what a lot of folks are trained in, you know, and it's how the literature is set up. It's how mental health literature is set up. So I think when folks in positions of power, whether it's a minister or sometimes even a therapist, come, and this has been my experience, there's this intention to fix instead of to be with. And so that said, I have to, even in my Buddhist community, I didn't find much support, but I did find a lot of support in the expressive arts community. And I think this is for a lot of the reasons that Sharoni was just mentioning about what the practice is in being in the body and allowing the creative spirit and soul to come into presence, and working with teachers and really fellow students, where also, I mean, this is why I come to the arts intuitively and theoretically, because some of us bear stories that, like, our nervous system actually is programmed not to speak in explicit language, and it's part of being a human. And this is trauma, but this is also incredible spiritual experiences as well. And it's like we need different languages to communicate. And so I think being in a community, in the expressive arts community, was the first time I was with people who could kind of intuitively allow the body and spirituality to be present in the creative process. And I did share a lot there. Like I shared a lot of my own story through my art, through the art making, through the process that is expressive therapy training. And so I would say that's the community where I kind of first actually found support. And that said, my own healing has been the most rooted in my own spiritual practice, which has absolutely been entwined with art and entwined with nature. But again, it's those art-based ways of knowing, those land-based ways of knowing that for me, let me tap into my embodied way of being and connecting. And I think there are definitely faith leaders out there that do that work. I just didn't happen to connect with any of them in my path.
Yeah, and maybe you can say a word or two about how a faith leader might respond differently, so that the embodiment and the art and the healing can happen in those communities as well.
Yeah, I think it's tricky, because I think that, you know, there's this line that no two survivors respond the same way, and I think it's true, so it makes it difficult. But for me, it is just about being with, in the true sense of witnessing without any attachment to goal or object other than actually just being with, you know. And if a person wants to talk, then listening. If a person is asking for certain advice, you know, especially around faith, then perhaps doing that. But I think for me, one of the biggest pieces that a faith leader can do in that situation, if they haven't had these types of childhood traumas, is to acknowledge that, and to acknowledge that they might not be able to understand, and that theory and dogma is not actually able to touch into the complexity that we bear with us. And so for me, again, that just comes back to being with, and just moving from that authentic love and compassion, and absolutely not trying to fix anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Iris.
Can I jump in on that for a second, Miriam? Is that okay?
Yeah.
I just want to say, I just in the last few weeks met a rabbi who I think she was trained in the Hebrew Union College Reform Jewish Seminary, so liberal denomination of Judaism. Emily Aronson is her name, and she's got a new project called Chronic Congregation. I think it's findable on Instagram. And I've seen her do a couple of talks recently where she's talking about the intersection of chronic illness, disability, and Judaism in a way that I rarely hear Jewish leaders talking about it. And one of her things that she talks about is a theology around chronic illness. And she has envisioned, to speak to your point, Iris, she has envisioned a God who sits with us and cries with us like a pastoral counselor, right? And the power of crying together, shedding the tears together, but not speaking and not processing it in another way, and like not verbalizing your pain and stuff. And like that image is really powerful to me. That idea of a God who sits, or like somebody who sits alongside you in the pain, because, suffering of one sort or another is everybody's lot in life. And I think for me, it's just really empowering to hear her talk about that, because I think on an individual basis, rabbis that I know speak to people who need the help in very compassionate and supportive ways. But I'm not sure that from the pulpit, you necessarily hear this as a conscientious part of their discourse. And that's something that I'm curious to see if it will evolve in different ways. She's not the first rabbi I know who's done healing work and work around illness and disability, but she seems to be doing something a little different with it now. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you, Moni, and thank you. The being with us so powerful, and part of why Amy and I wanted to create this journal and podcast. We also wondered if you could pick out a painting for Amy to share, and you to tell us a bit more about it.
Sure. So the one that kind of jumped at me was the one Her Light Drips Me. Yeah, that one. And you just want me to talk about it, Miriam? I guess the reason that I was drawn to this one is I just see so many textures present, and maybe also as we're just talking about this, and for me, like, all of my work is about the necessity of the arts in healing childhood trauma and integrating. And for me, when I see this piece, like, which was very much like, as I said in the thing, like I was really listening to Ani DeFranco at this point in my life and her guitar, and like I would just paint like for so long in the evening in my apartment alone with my cats, and they would get paint all over the place. And like I just am brought into my body with this, and like the satisfaction that I received from using my fingernails and using nails and rocks, for me, like in that the personal is political way, like I think there is a resistance to what we're taught has to be a pretty painting or proper technique, or in the ways that all these colonial and patriarchal paradigms like take over our meaning making processes. And so for me, when I see this and I see all the energy that I see on the screen from just paint in different directions and different colors, it speaks to me of that embodied practice. And it also speaks to me of the ability for especially visual art, abstract visual art, for me to express the complicated history of emotions that a survivor of childhood trauma lives with every day, in a way that is, for me, beautiful and safe and brings joy through the act of creating. And maybe I'll leave it at that.
I think I was such a provocative and beautiful piece. So thank you for sharing. And Amy.
Do you want to pull one of mine up now, or sorry, I just jumped ahead.
Yeah, sure, we can pull one up for sure. Just give me one sec here. And for those people who are listening to us, and if you want to go check out the pieces, you can just navigate to our journal, to our most recent issue, and you'll be able to see them there. And if you are watching on YouTube, you'll be following along with us, I'm sure. Sorry, just give me 1 second here. Did I pass it? I did pass it. Here we go. Is there one, Sharoni, that you were thinking of?
Yeah, I was thinking, I think the last one, the way you presented them, I think it's the last one, was probably the one that started me going on this project. Yes.
Okay, great.
So this is, okay, so for those of you who are listening in, this is an image. The background of it is what I took painter's tape, but very thin strips of painter's tape, and I just created a pattern derived from images that I found of medical photographs of fascia tissue, the collagen connective tissue that holds basically everything in place in our bodies, I guess. And so the background is watercolor painting against that tape. And then when the tape is removed, these white lines appear. And then there's a layer of diagrammatic bodies. I guess there's a figure and a half on this image where I took the diagnostic diagram that they use for fibromyalgia, which is the condition that I live with. And it's got demarcated spots on the body to indicate where they test you, to where they apply pressure to see if you express tenderness. And then if you hit 11 of the 18 or more than 11 of the 18, they diagnose you as having fibromyalgia if they can't find anything else to diagnose you with, I guess. And on top of all of that, there is, I don't know how many of you know what this is in it. So what I've done in this whole series is I've combined my own objects of self-care, things that I use to take care of my pain, like to manage my pain on a regular basis, with images drawn from Jewish sacred spaces, from synagogue life. So in this instance, it's a tool that's called the Back Buddy, and it's like a plastic thing that you hook over your shoulder or around your neck. And when you pull it toward you or pull it sort of away from your back, you can apply pressure to certain trigger points. And for me, that's very helpful in relieving certain kinds of pain some days. But I reimagined it here so that every end of it, where it points, is a little hand. And that is, I guess, an homage. I don't know what the best word for it is, but that's supposed to be representing the Torah pointers that are used in synagogue life. So you're not supposed to touch the Torah directly or get your finger oil on it, because it's parchment usually, and or yeah, some kind of skin, right? And so we use a kind of prosthetic device to extend our own reach, and it's just like usually a metal or wooden stick, very ornate most of the time, with a little hand sculpted at the end of it so that you can track the line as you're reading from the Torah if you're the community's leader, right? So I was really interested in thinking about all these different layers here. And I want to try to work with this kind of thing more going forward, like more of a kind of layered palimpsestic or collage-like kind of quality, thinking about the medicalization of these things and the absence of diagnostic tools or the insufficiency of supports. That's sort of playing in my mind when I look at this. And then also like all of these, I I guess all of the things I've had to suss out for myself over the years, like from word of mouth recommendations from people who also are dealing with variations on chronic pain, to find things like a back buddy or whatever. Like there's no doctor who sits down and tells you, here's a shopping list. You should get yourself, these 20 items that will maybe help you manage this when I can't help you manage it, right? So part of it was thinking about that, and part of it was putting this forward in people's direct line of sight so that people could experience a little hint of what it's like to have all of this stuff around you, kind of the day-to-day routine of self-care in my life, and making my invisible disability a bit more visible that way. And then also specifically combining it with imagery from synagogue life, because I saw the potential, and I saw these two visual vocabularies kind of merging in my mind as I sat with these things. And I was intrigued by what it would mean then to handle my body as if it were as sacred as a Torah, because I'm not sure I've always treated it with, kind of sacredness in my life, but to take that tender care of it in that way. And also to think a little bit about what's conjured up for us when we come to the Torah with the kind of sensitivity of keeping in mind the people in our community who are living with the ebbs and flows of chronic pain or disability or trauma or crossover of all of these things, right? And what it would mean to hold that Torah pointer and offer new readings and insights on the text, and new language for prayers or whatever it is, thinking about it that way, to come to the Torah with the same kind of tenderness that I'm now taking on my body. I mean, we do. I'm not implying that people mishandled the Torah in the first place, but just to come at it with that extra layer of sensitivity, I think would be really powerful. So that's where that came from.
Well, this is such a beautiful piece, and I love the colors of this one, Sharoni. It's in the background, it's like these beautiful warm like pinks and purples and kind of oranges, and then the front, and there's white running through it, and then there's like really beautiful rich dark purple in the front. It's so pretty. So thank you so much for blessing us with this artwork today. I'm going to stop sharing now. Okay. So we wanted to ask you, Sharoni, how do you imagine synagogues as places where people can turn to for comfort and care? So you've talked about the integration of some images and like tools that you might use while you're at synagogue. Could you tell us a little bit more about care and comfort?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's a very difficult question for me to navigate. I currently work part-time in one synagogue in Toronto, and hop around among different Jewish learning communities and synagogue spaces, and alternatives to synagogues, I guess, like the Jewish Studio project that I mentioned earlier. And I think that the amazing thing is that in many ways, if people have a good relationship with the rabbis in their congregation, if they're synagogue members, then they do find that they have that kind of individualized attention and care, right? And most of the rabbis I know in my experience, and I've worked in Jewish community for a while, so I know quite a number of rabbis, are incredibly compassionate, tender people. And they're even mindful in their frontal kind of lecturies, like sermonizing moments, right? But I think that there's room for a little bit more of that. And one of the things that I think is part of the challenge is that in Judaism, like in a lot of other places, there's a structured kind of codified code of prayer, ritual performances, various kinds of ritual acts, right? And then there's the more spontaneous effusion of this moment of intention of, what do I bring here to the table today? How am I feeling? What's moving me in my heart? So if you think about prayer, for example, you have like the formal, we call it keva, like the formal traditional structures of prayer. And then you have what we call kavanah in Hebrew, this idea of like this intentionality of this, like, this moved, like the Spirit's moving me in a kind of way, right? And sometimes it's very hard to achieve a mix of those two in a moment. And so one of the places that I've really struggled with in my community experience, and that I hope that a synagogue could reimagine even better than it's done so far, is a prayer for the sick. So when the Torah is open in our services, we often offer an opportunity for people to name the community members that they're thinking of who are ill or struggling with some kind of illness. And I have struggled with this because the language is, the prayer is usually translated into English as a prayer for complete and speedy healing, or complete healing, right? So there's like a curative model of the language in most of the translations. And secondly, as a person who's lived with 25 some extra years of chronic pain, like, am I supposed to put my name forward every week for this? Am I supposed to stand up and say, I'm having a flare up, sorry, can you take care of me this week? And also what extra care beyond the prayer, what beyond the blessing is then offered when people do stand up and say, like, okay, I know somebody who's ill. And, so I think communities do organize around recognizing there's a tradition of Bikur Halim, of taking care of the sick in the Jewish community. And there's, a huge network effort to support people who are known to be ill. But those questions of disclosure and like admission of like, when is it bad enough that I'm gonna get my name said? And when is it, well, this is an okay week, maybe I don't feel like I need it. And, how old am I? And when I was younger, it was so much harder to put myself forward to have people say my name or whatever, because it was just like, I was so self-conscious about having an invisible disability and then people knowing that. And then I worked in the community and I didn't want people to know that, because I didn't want people to I don't know, not hire me for the next job or whatever, right? And or have their doubts about my ability to commit to work. So I think that there are a lot of ways in which those things, I don't know what the answer is yet. I'm hoping to meet the people who can help me think through the answer, or who are already further ahead in that thinking than I am. But I think that there's still room for navigating all of that stuff in a more conscientious, more mindful way in those spaces. That's what I'll say to that for now.
Oh, thanks. That's so great. And I was thinking as you were talking, there's an article online. I can't remember the author's name, but it's called "Hurry Up and Heal," and it's about some of this push that people get oftentimes from people, which is like, aren't you like healed yet? Like, hurry up, like you've been going over this for so long, like it's time to move forward. And if I can find it, I'll link it below the podcast when we post it. So yeah, it's a really good one to read. So okay, Miriam, over to you.
This is our favorite part of our podcast, besides meeting all you beautiful people, that we can hear you talk to each other about your work. So we wondered, Iris, if you had a question or a thought about Sharoni's work you might share.
Yes, there's so much, especially everything that Sharoni, you just said in that response really resonated with me really strongly too. But I guess if I have to ask you a question about your work, I was just wondering if you would talk a little bit about your process. Like you did talk about it a little bit when you were talking about your piece, but just like, is it a long, like in doing the color backdrop and then in deciding what to juxtapose it with, like, is it experiential? Do you plan it out beforehand? Do you do drafts? Like, I just have process questions for you, or whatever you want to talk to.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I have process questions for you too. And I'm going to throw my question into the mix right away because it's part of my answer to you, which is that a lot of the work, especially this collection that you published in the journal, Amy and Miriam, a lot of this work is very cognitive. And I was really moved by your work, Iris, because in part because it feels more immediate to me. It feels more directly emotional, like you've tapped into something that I'm not always good at tapping into because I'm up in my head a lot. And so part of my process here was, I think I was just like, I guess maybe because as I don't know if it was like my personality or my training, but because of my background in research, I sit and think a lot before I do anything. I don't know if any of you can relate to that, but I sit and think a long time before I do things usually. And so in this instance, I had been sitting and mulling over the objects that surround me in my home and noticing that there were affinities between, I think it started probably with the foam roller Torah idea, that I was looking at this massage roller, like this rolling pin that I had. And I was like, oh, if you put two of those together, it kind of looks like a Torah scroll. I wonder what could come of that. And I started talking to people about it. And one friend saw an opportunity to connect the TENS machine, the electrode thing, with phylacteries that you wear around your arm or around your head in Judaism. And another friend suggested the pomegranate pillbox. And so, I just sort of, it evolved from there in terms of building up a collection. And I was imagining, I was also shopping for a medicine cabinet around the same time. And I was like, oh, these beautiful Torah scrolls, or Torah containers, rather, these wooden and metal cases that come from parts of the world like Syria and Yemen and I think also Morocco. They have these like really elaborate cases, and what would it be like to reimagine that as a medicine cabinet? So the imagery started there, and then I was trying to visualize like what do I do with that on paper? Because I was imagining it as a set of sculptural objects first, actually, because I was in the studio working in clay at the time. And then the pandemic hit, and I was like, how can I do this as sort of sketches toward this sculptural installation? And I hadn't been doing a lot of work on paper for years. So it was definitely a challenge. And I would say I just started looking at medical images and like photographs of different tissues and things like that, and thinking about all the different systems that I feel are interplaying in my own fibromyalgia situation, the nervous system, the fascia, like all of the things that I've gone for acupuncture for, or massage therapy for, or like you name it, I've tried this, craniofacial. I've tried all kinds of different things, trying to figure out like which system needs their help today, right? So I was interested in thinking about that embodied experience and like as a background. And then I think the rest just came more intuitively. And one of them I probably did something you could call a draft, because I chucked it and the colors were way wrong, and then I redid it. So, but mostly I would say like the colors were more intuitive. I looked at the paint container and I was like, these appeal to me right now, right? And then I just started building it up that way. So, yeah. Does that answer your question, Iris?
Yes, it does. I love also imagining you, like the fact, because I forgot how you had started talking about the clay, and like that is how you would have been kind of envisioning this, and then moving. So now as you were talking, I was like trying to look at them and seeing if I see like the earthy clay quality. And I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm imagining it, but I feel like I can still tap into that even a little bit. But I love the building up too.
Yeah, I think I was maybe thinking about them as more porcelain, like decorated porcelain objects, or Maiolica style objects in clay. Maiolica is a really interesting technique where you take usually not a pure white clay, often a red clay, and you cover it with a tin or lead based glaze, like something that's made the clear glaze white, right? And then it's a very stable glaze that you can paint into. So you can do really very interesting decorative painting work in Maiolica. So I had been playing around with one or the other of those kinds of things in my head before the pandemic. And then, I've just stayed home for 2 years now. Haven't left my apartment. I'm afraid of all of you people. Can I ask you my question for you, which is related to that? Yeah. So because I was saying my process is so cognitive, it's like, it's so up in my head, like how can I marry these ideas from these different places? How can I do some background research and find some inspirational images and, you know, think about the layers and the diagrams and all of those pieces. I was especially moved. I've been trying to tap into that tactile embodied experience of painting lately, just by finger painting, just getting my hands dirty with acrylic paint and like kind of activating the badger brain part of my head that likes to carve things away and dig things out, and that hasn't been activated for, you know, not being in my clay studio. So I was really moved by your pieces, by the application of color, the layers, the seeming chaos, especially in the piece you just showed us. Like there's a kind of an uncontained quality to that piece, especially, right? But still really meditative. And there's this really interesting balance that's coming across for me between those energies. And then to learn that you were doing it with like with nails or with your fingernails or with rocks and things, like how did you come to that process? You talk about this like land-based embodied sense of communion that you have. I just want to hear you explain that to me so I can tap into it too.
I don't know that I can. I'll do my best, but I don't, it's such a visceral way of being. It's like, you know, I think the first part is that because I came to painting later, and I also, as everyone has expressed, I work professionally as an academic. I have been in academia my entire adult life. So I think that for me, like there was so much freedom in allowing myself to just paint with no rules. And the fact that I had no training, whereas like when it comes to writing and researching, like I have all the training, like this was like no training, and it was so liberating for me. And I think that it was having no rules that allows me, I think, to just follow the paint. And it's like simultaneously, it's like the impulse in my body is connected to the color, and it's just following it in a very meditative way, I think. And then that interestingly really started reflecting, because I'm also a poet, and it started reflecting in my poetry and letting me break down like those rigid rules of writing that I had been taught. But in terms of the, like, I think because so much of my healing has come from being in nature, and just being with nature, being quiet in nature, walking in nature, whether it's High Park or it's out west. And then like, so I used to go to High Park is like something you said about the like uncontained energy, like I feel that within myself. And so I would just go to High Park and I would walk, and I started just collecting rocks. And then I was like, I'm going to paint with this. And it was like bringing it into this more connected process for me. But rarely I think in the beginning I was thinking about it. Like I remember being like, oh, I'm going to make images of fire because I wanted to work with that like intense fire energy. But it didn't last that long. Like, and then training in expressive arts also, because like part of the visual art is like being blindfolded and making a mark on the paper and then having to work out of that. So it's like having done a bit of training in there where I got the prompts to like, okay, splash paint, and then emerge from there. So I think I've also trained myself to like, and it's a very meditative practice for me, and I do meditate regularly as well. So I think it's like, just like I practice watching the thought and letting it go, like I practice, like, oh my gosh, the judgment voice is like, what is this? What are you doing? Like it pops up, and then I'm like, okay, miss, you know, and it's like, okay. And then I just try, like, it's just following the color. But I also think I do actually paint with music. And that gets me into a rhythm and into the body as well. So it's all these different, I don't think that's an answer to you at all, but it's just describing the process a bit.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, Miriam and Amy, I don't know what you want to jump in with, but I'm just also moved by the nails that will eventually rust over time, but that are a feature of that painting. I think there's a lot of powerful symbolism in that too, and just like thinking about the potential scar tissue of the canvas in that moment. Yeah, just it's beautiful.
Yes, it's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing about your processes, both of you. That was amazing. And I feel like, you know, when people ask you the question of what would you do with your life if you weren't doing X, Y, Z, I feel like part of me would want to be an artist. Maybe that's something I can explore later on after I'm done all this academic stuff. So we wanted to ask the last question for you both today is, what does your soul care look like while you're doing this work? And how do you nurture your spirit while you are engaging with some of these difficult themes that we explored today? So I'm wondering, Sharoni, would you like to start us off?
Honey, I was hoping that you would go back to Iris first. This one is tough for me. I don't know that I'm conscious of it. Well, that's not true. I would say somewhere along the way, when I left my PhD and I gave up on what I thought would be a fairly linear, ambitious path of a career as faculty somewhere, I reoriented something along, I don't know where in the last dozen or so years, I've reoriented to describing myself as not ambitious in a career sense. Like, I'm not trying to climb a ladder. I want to have impact in the work, in the various jobs that I do, but I don't feel the need to like be ambitious with a capital A like that. But I tell people I'm ambitious when it comes to my soul. And I feel like I'm constantly trying to cultivate some sense of my soul in this world. And I don't know exactly what that means, but for me in the last couple of years, certainly, I mean, learning is a big piece of that for me. So I spend a lot of time in online learning communities, in online classes, and meeting with people in dynamic dialogic spaces, because I really like that exchange rather than just sitting down and reading on my own these days. I also do some poetry, but not publishable. I've been taking workshops. The amazing thing, by the way, through the pandemic is the Poetry Foundation in Chicago has been offering free workshops, hot tip, online every week. It's amazing. Maggie Queenie is the teacher. She's wonderful. So I feel like I've learned a lot about getting rid of the critical voice that, like, I was an English literature scholar, so it was not in my imagination to be a creative writer because I had so built up that critical voice. So disabling that critical voice in a sense, and kind of enabling the creative voice has been a hard balance, a hard activity, but I think that must be part of the soul care work, right? So it's, you know, a good bath and music while you're painting or doodling, and you know, Murdoch mysteries in the background some days, I don't know, something like that, right? And like just trying to learn more, to hear from more people who were not part of my immediate inner circle in my first phases of life, and you know, to grow in community in those ways feels like real soul care work to me too. And it's all intertwined with the art and the creative process at this stage. So that's where I'm at with that.
Thank you so much, Sharoni. And what about you, Iris?
Yeah, it's not an easy question. I agree. And I was really grateful that you went to Sharoni first. I think, you know, I think the way that the arts, I think I look to the arts to teach me how to lead a more integrative life. I think it's interesting, like a number of, we've been mentioning this tension with academia, with critical thought, right? That is something that has been in my life since, not when I was an undergrad, but when I entered grad school, in I don't know how old I was, 22. I've always been at odds with this learned idea of what intellectual thought is. And for me, I also recognize that I think that conceptual thought is a beautiful art form when it is allowed to be an art form. And so for me, the soul work is like trying to take out these learned categories of here I am an artist, and here I'm a professor, and here I'm a student, and here I'm a friend, you know, and it's like allowing this fluid mess to emerge so that I don't, because I think when I'm trying to separate those parts of myself, so I'm hiding. And I'm hiding always the survivor. And so it's like when she is allowed to just be who I am, like that's the soul work for me. And the arts have taught me that about myself. They've taught me about that inherent creative rhythm that can be in everything. And so I think, and like, can I just emphasize the good bath? like it's the soul work. It's funny too, I hated baths for the first half of my life, and then I, again, trauma related, learned to love them, and they are like such a place of integration and release for me. And like the heat, and again the body, right, like allowing the rest. And for me, this soul work is actually like I will go through periods where I don't paint for quite a while, and then I'll be painting. And then I, you know, it's like not putting the pressure that I need to perform a certain way, or I need to share it, or like really unlearning the whole, like it's only worthy if it's published, or it's only worthy if it's been approved by someone else, and like claiming the process of it. For me, the soul work is being in the process and actually not attaching to the outcome, and trying to find a way to continuously learn to do that, because it's so hard in this consumer driven, capitalistic, patriarchal, colonial, white supremacist world that we live in North America.
Yeah, thank you so much, Iris and Sharoni. This has been a very thought-provoking, creative collaboration of a conversation, and I'm not an artist myself, but I'm so in awe of your work and how you live the process. So thank you for sharing that. And I agree with a good bath or a good book or a cheesy TV show to like set the brain off a bit. We wondered if there was anything else you wanted to share today that you haven't had a chance to say. If not, that's totally fine too.
Yeah, I'll just make a book recommendation. And maybe Iris, you've come across this, but the woman who runs the Jewish Studio Project that I keep mentioning because I'm training with them now and it's very much foremost on my mind, Rabbi Adina Allen is the daughter of an arts therapist who ran something called the Open Studio Project. And she has a book, her name is Pat Allen, she has a few books, but one called Art is a Spiritual Path. And it might be, for people who are interested in this kind of conversation, it might be a really good opening place to start exploring this a little bit more. And Miriam, I would say, you're not an artist, right? Like everybody can be an artist. I've been finger painting lately, and it's kind of amazing what happens, right? So everybody can be an artist if you just start tapping into that creative instinct that was maybe overridden by teachers or parents or everybody over the years, right? But you can get back to it if you just put all that aside and just play with the materials, right? Because Iris was saying it's all about process, not product. And that's really the fun of it. Just like lose yourself in the materials and see what surfaces. That's the beauty part.
Thank you, Sharoni.
I would say that book actually is interesting because that book, I do know that book, and it was the first time I had like seen someone that was like artisan, and I was like, this is me. This is my spiritual practice. Art, there's language around this. And it was really like helpful. Again, that solidarity, right? And that just knowing that yeah, the process. I won't go into it, but I also wanted to say, I also just want to say how much I really appreciated this journal and this, like, when I read through it, when you sent, like, I sent it to so many people because I think it's wonderful and so needed. And the range of experiences and articles and just bringing these conversations, creating space for them. Like, this is how we change academia in these systems. So I just wanted to thank you for the work that you are doing.
Yeah. Thank you for being part of it, and thank you to our listeners today. We hope it sparks some creativity in your lives.
Hear, hear. Thank you very much to both of you and to Iris for the conversation. And I want to echo what Iris said. I felt really empowered by your choice, by the fact that you selected my work for publication, and to be part of this broader conversation is really exciting for me. So thank you.